We are. Good morning. Good morning. Are we going? Yes, we are. We are now getting reports that Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who has more screws loose than an elevator at Mar-a-Lago, Bobby Kennedy Jr. is expected to end his race for president sometime on Friday. There are now reports that back-channel communications between Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Donald Trump Jr. began last week. That's right, private negotiations between Bobby Kennedy Jr. and Don Jr., which I can only describe as inadequate namesake to inadequate namesake. These negotiations took place late last week. We are hearing that Don Jr. negotiated a deal where Kennedy will endorse Donald Trump in exchange for some kind of cabinet-level position inside the Trump administration, something like Secretary of Disappointment to our dads. I think that's an actual cabinet-level position. One of the many reasons Trump is losing this thing is he doesn't trust anyone unless they're dumber than he is, which is why he's leaning so much on his son, Don Jr. Here's a general rule of thumb. Whatever Don Jr. advises, do the complete opposite. Jr. always resented Jared Kushner and felt Jared had usurped his seniority and authority within the family. Well, Jared got his $2 billion from Saudi Arabia. He's done with the Trumps, which Don Jr. is thrilled about because now that gives Don Jr. an opportunity to shine as the consigliere. And this is precisely why Donald Trump is losing this thing. He's going to bring the entire Republican Party down with him. Do you know who the original Diaper Don was? Don Jr. That was Don Jr.'s nickname in college, Diaper Don. According to the book Born Trump, written by Vanity Fair's Emily Jane Fox, when Don Jr. attended Penn, he would often get so drunk he would wander around the dorm and crawl into the wrong bed, pass out, wake up in a pool of his own fluids, thereby earning him the nickname Diaper Don. Go read this book. You might remember the last deal Don Jr. negotiated was convincing his father to pick J.D. Vance as his running mate. J.D. Vance is officially the least popular candidate for vice president in modern American history. Of course he was. It was Don Jr.'s idea. J.D. Vance now comes in with a lower approval rating than even Sarah Palin, who I'm not sure was even a human being. Remember Sarah Palin back in 2008 when John McCain blew it completely by picking her as his number two? Vance issued a statement late Thursday night that if rumors are true, he welcomes Bobby Kennedy Jr. to the sinking ship. So expect this headline late Friday. Bobby Kennedy Jr. drops out, endorses Donald Trump. Jack Schlossberg, President John F. Kennedy's annoying, malignant narcissist of a grandson, Jack Schlossberg, told NBC News Wednesday night, quote, "I wouldn't be surprised if cousin Bobby was working for President Trump at some point or in the past. I think it's clear that their interests, again, align." Then Jack Schlossberg added, "Hey, everybody, look at me. I'm a graduate of Harvard Law and Harvard Business School. Look how tall and handsome and young I am with my full shock of Kennedy hair. Everybody thinks I'm so funny, but I'm not. I'm just good looking. So unlike David Feldman, women laugh at everything I say because I'm cute and I don't have to work particularly hard at anything, which is why it's all about me. It's why everything is about me. Like last year when I was handing out that Profile and Courage Award at the Kennedy Library, I didn't prepare myself because I can just talk extemporaneously about me." Jack Schlossberg. I watch this guy and I think he should have been my son. I was supposed to marry Caroline Kennedy. That's what my parents told me. I was supposed to marry Caroline Kennedy. And it should be my son up there, Jack Feldman, not Jack Schlossberg. No, my son, Jack Feldman, with hair transplants and a double chin, not this Adonis, Jack Schlossberg. It should be Jack Feldman annoying everyone. Anyway, where was I? Don't be jealous. That's the point I'm making. And who's to say my marriage to Caroline Kennedy would have even lasted? Lord knows all my other marriages didn't last. So it's just as well. Look at this guy. The difference between Jack Schlossberg and me is like the difference between a panther and a dung beetle. And I'm the dung beetle. If I looked like Jack Schlossberg, I'd be a sociopath. I swear to God, if I woke up one morning and looked like Jack Schlossberg, I'd be I would just walk into fancy restaurants, order a round of drinks for everyone, and then leave without paying. And when they stop me, I'd go, hey, it's perfectly fine. I'm incredibly good looking. And my grandfather, you might have heard of him, John F. Kennedy. Bye. See, that's how I divide the world. It comes down to two types of people in this world. There are the people like Jack Schlossberg and the people like me who have to design, I hope you're in the mood for diarrhea, chef's aprons. That's how I size up a human being. I look them in the eye and I think, would this guy ever lower himself to sell? I hope you're in the mood for diarrhea, chef's apron. I'll tell you one thing about Jack Schlossberg. He never had to design a chef's apron with the words, I hope you're in the mood for diarrhea on it. Okay? But you know who else never had to design an I hope you're in the mood for diarrhea chef's apron? Coach Waltz. But unlike Jack Schlossberg, Coach Waltz would take an extra job coaching after-school gym. Unlike Jack Schlossberg, Coach Waltz would take an extra job coaching after-school girls' gymnastics just so he could help me out and buy, and I hope you're in the mood for diarrhea chef's apron. And then you know what Coach Waltz would do after he bought one? He'd say, don't bother sending it to me. Keep the money. Or better yet, donate it. Donate it. Donate the I hope you're in the mood for diarrhea chef's apron to a family in need that can't afford and I hope you're in the mood for diarrhea chef's apron. Because that's the kind of guy Coach Waltz is. And if I took a meeting with Governor Waltz in the office in Minnesota, if I pitched the idea of every public school cafeteria working who's handing out all those free breakfasts and lunches to every single child in the state, if I said, you know, you should, as governor, mandate that all these cafeteria workers have to wear an I hope you're in the mood for diarrhea chef's apron, if I pitched that idea inside his office, he'd say, let me think about it. That's the kind of guy Coach Waltz is. Unlike Jack Schlossberg, with his Schlossberg charm and boyish good looks. Hey, look at me. I'm a Schlossberg. Every woman on the planet wants to sleep with me because I inherited all the charisma from my grandfather, Mordecai Schlossberg, the number one salesman of Adler shoes along the Northeast Corridor from 1959 all the way up to 1962. Every woman wants to be with me, and every guy wants to be like me because I'm the grandson of Mordecai Schlossberg. God, I need help. Anyway, Bobby Kennedy Jr. is expected to drop out of the race. Sometime on Friday, he's expected to endorse Donald Trump. I'll have more on that momentarily, but first, this is the mop-up for August 22nd, 2024. I'm David Feldman in New York. Thank you so much for finding me. Please like this episode so I remain in your feed, and the best way to help is by sharing this specific episode. Please copy and paste the link to this episode and share it on social media via text or email. The only reason you're listening to me right now is because someone shared this episode with you, or a close friend shared it and it ended up in your feed. That's the only reason you're listening to me. Plus, you need help like I do. That's probably the only reason you're listening to me right now, is you need help. Here is an update on the ongoing migrant shortage. Yes, we have a migrant shortage. Border crossings now are at a record low, creating a shortage of migrants for Republicans to demonize. NBC is reporting that despite Texas Governor Greg Abbott promising a cheering, vindictive, and sadistic crowd at the Republican convention in Milwaukee that he would ship migrants to blue cities, well, despite all that, during the entire month of July, Texas Governor Greg Abbott shipped 0 migrants out of his state because he cannot find any. So please, if you're watching in Haiti, El Salvador, or Guatemala, come to America. Republicans need more scapegoats. There is no migrant crisis. It's fictitious. Well, as I reported just moments ago, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is expected to end his race for president in a speech scheduled for Friday in Arizona. Kennedy is also reportedly going to throw his political weight behind Donald Trump. Earlier this week, Kennedy's running mate said the campaign was considering shutting it all down. Kennedy, a mercurial politician to put it mildly, could change his mind, of course, but his polling numbers are in the dumper, as is his fundraising. So far, he has only made it on the ballot in 19 states. Kennedy's wife, actress Cheryl Hines, is reportedly furious that Bobby is planning to endorse Donald Trump. Cheryl Hines starred in Curb Your Enthusiasm, playing the wife of Larry David, who it turns out is only slightly less insane than her real-life husband. A spokesman for the Harris campaign said the Democratic nominee isn't surprised by Kennedy's decision to endorse Trump, since he spent most of the year parroting nothing but MAGA talking points. As we reported earlier this week, Kennedy asked to meet with Harris, where he was prepared to offer her an endorsement in exchange for a cabinet-level position. Harris apparently refused to meet with him. So he's going to endorse Donald Trump because what's the difference? What's the difference? Harris? Trump? Potatoes? During an appearance on Fox and Friends Thursday, Donald Trump called Bobby Kennedy a good man, said he's very smart. Trump added he would be more than happy to accept Kennedy's endorsement. The two met in person during the Republican convention in Milwaukee. Right after surviving that assassination attempt back in July, Trump spoke with Bobby Kennedy Jr. on the phone, urging him to drop out and work for the Trump campaign. Both Kennedy and Trump are scheduled to speak in Arizona on Friday. Arizona, where Arizona Republicans picked up a modest win on Thursday. The Supreme Court, which is in recess until October, issued an emergency ruling Thursday upholding Arizona's right to demand voters show proof of citizenship before casting an absentee ballot. Ian Millhiser, writing over at Vox, says while this makes it somewhat harder for people of color to vote in Arizona, the court yesterday rejected the Republican Party's motion to take away voting rights for thousands of residents who have already registered. So if you've already registered in Arizona and you didn't present proof of citizenship, the Supreme Court ruled on Thursday that you're still good to go when it comes to voting in November. Fred Trump III, Donald Trump's nephew, the son of Donald Trump's oldest brother, Fred, now says his uncle, Donald, is suffering from early onset of Alzheimer's disease. Fred Trump said his grandfather, Donald's father, suffered from the disease and said it runs in the family, adding that Donald's older sister, Mary Ann, had it before she died. Fred Trump III also has a son who suffers from severe seizures and requires around-the-clock care. Fred Trump III writes in his new book that Donald Trump, after talking about his nephew, said people with disabilities require way too much time, money, and energy from their caregivers. Then Donald Trump said he thought at some point the caregivers would be better off if these people just died, which, if I'm not mistaken, is Project 2025's alternative to Obamacare. J.D. Vance, who wrote the introduction to Project 2025, was in Georgia on Thursday where, according to the New York Times, he blamed Kamala Harris for drug dealers entering the country. He accused her of sparking riots in Atlanta, destroying the city of San Francisco, and killing nursing student Laken Riley. Well, it's still more than anything J.D. Vance ever did in his life. The United Auto Workers, under the leadership of Shawn Fain, demanded on Thursday that Democrats give a speaking spot during the final night of the convention to a representative of the Palestinian people. The UAW represents nearly 1 million workers, many of whom live in Michigan, which is home to one of the largest Arab American communities in the country. Biden, you might remember, won the Michigan primary back in February with 618,000 votes, but more than 100,000 voted uncommitted to protest his administration's unwavering support for Israel. Those 100,000 Michigan votes turned into roughly 30 delegates who are now in Chicago. Although they have engaged in panel discussions, they have yet to be allowed to speak before the entire convention. Iranian-backed Hezbollah and Israeli soldiers once again exchanged rocket fire along the northern Israeli and southern Lebanon border on Thursday, as American-brokered peace talks now seem to be breaking down. Hamas said on Thursday 40,265 Palestinians have been killed since war started. Meanwhile, relatives of Israeli hostages held by Hamas in Gaza are now accusing the Netanyahu government of having more interest in prolonging the war that Israel cannot win. They have more interest in that than urging a ceasefire. The families of the hostages say the only way to bring the hostages home is through a ceasefire. But Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says repeatedly he will not stop fighting until Hamas is eliminated, which many leading Israeli generals and politicians are now saying is an impossibility. With war between Israel and Hamas entering its 322nd day, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken is in the region trying to jumpstart negotiations. They begin again this weekend in Egypt. Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu has reportedly agreed to terms of the treaty that was ironed out by the Biden administration, but The Economist now reports Hamas leadership is split on whether they should agree to the ceasefire. There are reports that the new head of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, is demanding that negotiations cannot resume until Israel guarantees his own physical safety. Sinwar rose to power earlier this month after his predecessor was killed in Iran. Although Israel refused to take credit for the assassination, it is generally agreed they were behind it, which is why Iran and Hezbollah are now threatening to launch a full-scale attack. One of the key sticking points is Israel's refusal to pull out of Gaza completely, insisting some troops must remain along the Egyptian border in southern Gaza to prevent any flow of arms into the territory. Egypt, which is hosting this weekend's peace talks, is reportedly demanding that Israel remove the troops from all of Gaza, even along the Egyptian border, while Netanyahu is reportedly refusing to budge on this one point. The Washington Post reports Israel's refusal to remove troops from Gaza's southern border will probably kill any chances of a ceasefire. Talks with Hamas, like I said, are scheduled to resume this weekend, but there are reports that Hamas's new leader is torn, wanting a deal, but at the same time hoping Iran and Hezbollah launch an invasion. Well then, each year, America gives Israel roughly $4 billion in military aid, which Israel then turns around and uses to purchase American-made weapons. That doesn't count the supplemental passed back in April. Okay, we give Israel $4 billion. Israel currently spends roughly $30 billion a year on defense, probably more right now. So America is providing anywhere between 1/7, 1/8, maybe 1/9 of Israel's military budget. Do the math, and you decide how much influence that gives the Biden administration over Bibi Netanyahu, who has repeatedly told the United States, if necessary, I will go it alone. I'm not certain cutting off 1/8, 1/9 of Israel's military defense funding, I'm not sure if sending the aircraft carriers home will change Bibi Netanyahu's mind. I think it will change a lot of Israelis' minds, but I don't think it's changing Bibi Netanyahu's mind, which is why he's got to go. There will be no ceasefire as long as Bibi Netanyahu is the prime minister of Israel. Right now, diplomacy is necessary, but diplomacy isn't going to work. What is generally agreed upon quietly within the corridors of power inside the Biden White House is Netanyahu has to go. Netanyahu has this fantastical notion of wiping out Hamas. And while that's a wonderful idea, the same way wiping out Al-Qaeda was a wonderful idea, I don't think it can be done. Now, because Netanyahu screwed up on October 7th, the same way George W. Bush screwed up on September 11th, this war is an attempt to redeem himself. In many ways, the war in Gaza is more about Netanyahu's reputation than it is Israeli security. That is why Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, the highest-ranking Jew in American government, has called on the Israeli people to remove Benjamin Netanyahu from office. The general consensus seems to be that as of this moment, there doesn't seem to be any hope for a deal on release of the hostages who were seized on October 7th. This suggests that it now looks like Secretary of State Blinken will return to the White House empty-handed after what is now his 9th trip to the region since fighting began. I doubt we're going to see, if it doesn't work this weekend, what I'm hearing is talks will be completely broken down and they're going to wait to see how big a landslide President Harris gets in November. Right now, would a ceasefire hold? Probably not. Would it bring all the hostages home? Probably not. If Israel agreed to remove troops along the southern border of Gaza, would Egypt make sure Hamas doesn't get new shipments of weapons that prolongs the war with Israel? Absolutely not. If Biden sent the aircraft carriers home and cut off all aid to Israel, would that force Benjamin Netanyahu to pull out? I could say with absolute certainty, absolutely not. But what it might do is scare the Israeli voters enough to remove Netanyahu from office. Benjamin Netanyahu has to go. And when she becomes president, he will be gone. She can't do it now. It wouldn't be expedient politically. But come January 20th, when President Harris is sworn in, I doubt if when Harris wins, Benjamin Netanyahu will remain in office. He's got to go. Iran has made it clear they will not attack Israel if there's a ceasefire. Iran and Lebanon do not want a war with Israel because Israel is perceived as the most powerful army in the region. But they weren't on October 7th. They were one of the weakest. And Israel's last war with Hezbollah in Lebanon was a disaster for Israel. It was a disaster for Lebanon, but it was also a disaster for Israel. I don't know enough about this region, but I know more than most Americans do. After she's elected, President Harris is going to have to make it clear, and she will make it clear to the people of Israel, we have your back, but not until you throw Bibi Netanyahu to the curb. One of the things I learned about watching the convention this week is my failure of imagination. That's one of the things I learned, how I possess a catastrophic lack of imagination because I'm old. I was clinging to Joe Biden. I couldn't imagine a month ago what I'm witnessing this week. I still love Joe Biden, I do. But this is so much better. And unfortunately, I hate to say this, but it's the truth. It is so much better because it's Kamala Harris and not Joe Biden. It's not to take anything away from Joe Biden, but it's the facts of life. He's in his 80s. Kamala is young. I'm old. I had a catastrophic failure of imagination. I couldn't imagine what I'm saying. It's time for old people to, advise, be exasperated, and talk, but so much of all of what's going on in the Middle East is a catastrophic lack of imagination. Get rid of Benjamin Netanyahu because keeping him in power, allowing him to remain in power, is a mortal failure of imagination. The same way America cannot afford another 4 years of Donald Trump, Israel and the Middle East cannot afford another 4 hours of Benjamin Netanyahu. He effed up on October 7th, the same way George W. Bush effed up on September 11th. We should have gotten rid of George Bush on September 12th, and Israel should have gotten rid of Benjamin Netanyahu on October 8th. It is a catastrophic lack of imagination to think the leader who created this mess is somehow going to find his way out of it. Hi. Good news for Donald Trump. The Labor Department announced it overestimated employment growth between March of 2023 and March of 2024 by 818,000 jobs. That means The economy averaged 174,000 new jobs per month, as opposed to 242,000 jobs per month. That's roughly 28% fewer than reported, but still better than anything Donald Trump did during his 4 horrible years in office. Unfortunately for Donald Trump, the U.S. GDP in the first half of this year grew at a 2% clip, which means the economy can slow down with plenty of cushion to prevent a recession, which Donald Trump is desperately hoping for. By the way, a recession is 2 consecutive quarters with negative GDP growth. There are 4 quarters in a year, right? And we just finished the second quarter, which means mathematically there's no time for America to slip into recession before Election Day. Unemployment now stands at 4.3%, edging up slightly, suggesting the Fed's decision to keep interest rates high has succeeded, some would say, in slowing the economy, something the Fed wants to do in order to bring inflation down, which now stands at a little more than 3%. Now remember, the Fed's goal is to fine-tune the economy, aiming for a sweet spot of 2% inflation and 4% unemployment. Nobody's quite certain raising and lowering interest rates has any effect on inflation. I don't think it does. As Vice President Harris said last week, outlining her economic plan, one of the chief drivers of inflation is price gouging. She didn't go after the Fed and say, it's not interest rates, it's price gouging, and she added the concentration of corporate power, right? This whole thing with interest rates to fight inflation is a deflection, a way to keep our eye off the concentration of corporate power. With Wall Street racking up record profits, inflation is caused by corporations being able to charge whatever they want because there's less competition. You can raise interest rates and lower interest rates and mess with unemployment. This is about price gouging. Inflation is price gouging and no competition. It's called pricing power. Instead of saying we have a monopoly on snack food, they say we have pricing power. A lot of people, including me, believe the chief reason the Fed raises interest rates and then keeps them high is to generate more profits for the banking and credit card industry, because the Fed is really a bank that answers to other bankers. So the more the Fed charges for money, the more banks get to charge for money. Kind of like when OPEC cuts off the spigot, forcing Exxon to charge more for gas, right? Whenever that happens, then profits for Exxon miraculously double. They pass along the costs to the consumers. So when the Fed keeps interest rates high, your credit card company and the banks and the mortgage lenders pass those costs on to the people who borrow money. The Federal Reserve meets next week on September 18th, where we're expected to see a rate cut because evidence seems to be mounting, at least for the Fed, that our economy is not necessarily tipping into a recession. The Fed believes it's cooling off. This economy cooled off for half this country back in 1981 when Ronald Reagan was sworn in. Who knows? I don't know. I know that 2% growth so far this year is pretty good. It's the job numbers the Fed is worried about. And right now, the Fed is keeping interest rates at 5.3%. That's the highest it's been in nearly 20 years. That means he's propping up the banks. Higher interest rates, more profits for the banks and credit card companies. Higher interest rates make borrowing for purchases of homes, cars, and especially business expansion equipment. It makes it all more expensive. Supposedly, lower interest rates makes the cost of borrowing cheaper, thereby increasing consumer spending, and cheaper money increases risk-taking by the pricks who call themselves job creators, but they don't create jobs, they ship them overseas. Meanwhile, Donald Trump insists any rate cut in September will prove that the Federal Reserve is working to get Kamala Harris elected. But Jerome Powell, the current Fed chair, was appointed by Donald Trump. And Biden, much to my chagrin, renominated him. So, Trump is exhibiting the same paranoia and narcissism that went into his killing of that bipartisan border deal at the beginning of the year. Anybody who works to make things better for Americans while Joe Biden is president, anybody who does that is clearly trying to humiliate Donald Trump. Meanwhile, on Friday, Fed Chair Jerome Powell delivers what many consider his most important speech of the year as he plays host to an annual meeting of the world's central bankers in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. The United States, remember this, the United States constitutes 25% of the global economy. And the world's central bankers are in Wyoming this weekend to be reassured. Earlier this month, the stock market suffered a mini meltdown because of a global sell-off sparked by fear that the American economy was shrinking. It's not. If the American economy shrinks, the rest of the world shrinks. All that being said, central bankers are expected to leave the economic summit this weekend promising lower interest rates around the world in order to prevent an economic dip. How am I doing on time? Okay, meanwhile, China's economy is still struggling, especially its housing market, with home prices down 26% in the past year. I'm going to move to China. Housing is affordable there. The Chinese government attempted to keep property values artificially inflated by spending $70 billion gobbling up unsold real estate. It's not helping. By the way, Semaphore reports this morning that the communist government is reluctant to offer financial aid to the citizens of China for fear financial aid would encourage laziness. The communist government of China fears financial aid for its citizens would encourage laziness. Republicans are communists, it turns out. During his valedictory, I'm wrapping it up. During his valedictory Monday night at the DNC convention, President Biden boasted when he took office, everyone predicted China would surpass America as the world's #1 economy. He bragged Monday night that thanks to his CHIPS Act and other key pieces of legislation pumping billions into our economy, he proved everybody wrong. And that's true. America is still the #1 economy in the world because Joe Biden is a successful president. The Chinese economy is on the ropes, partly thanks to tariffs imposed during both the Trump and Biden administrations. Joe Biden imposed tariffs this year on electric vehicles and batteries. Trade between America and China is down precipitously this year, and other Western nations are pivoting away from China, moving towards English-speaking countries like India as their source for inexpensive labor and manufacturing. The problem, of course, is when you cut off trade with a rival superpower, you're more likely to go to war. The world is complicated, which is why we can't afford to elect morons like Donald Trump Jr. and J.D. Vance. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. I want to watch Kamala's speech. If you would like a transcript, she's about to speak in about 15 minutes. If you would like a transcript of today's episode, it's free. Go to shopdavidfeldman.com. And the reason it's free is because my listeners buy garbage over at Shop David Feldman, like the Still a Democrat coffee mug, my favorite, the Made in Los Estados Unidos coffee mug, the coffee mug with Albert Einstein saying I'm surrounded by idiots, and of course my worst case scenario map that I made for my sister. It's a coffee mug with my worst case scenario map, showing that no matter what happens, Kamala Harris will get at the very least 270 electoral votes on Election Day, and all you need is 270 electoral votes to win. And if you're not Jack Schlossberg, if you're like me and you're capable of empathy for losers like me, you may want to pick up the chef's apron that says, I hope you're in the mood for diarrhea. That's my biggest seller. I'm ashamed that it's my biggest seller. But unlike Jack Schlossberg, I have to work with what I have, and I don't got much. Look at him. Look at him. I swear to God, if I had 1/10 of what this kid has, I'd be a sociopath. Damn it. Thank you, everybody. Please subscribe to my newsletter, my channel. Please. He's got that Mordechai Schlossberg charisma. He inherited it from his grandfather, Mordechai Schlossberg. I mean, it's all there. And a little from Jack Kennedy. But I mostly see Mordechai Schlossberg. Please share this episode with your friends. That is the best way to help me. Share this, get the word out. Thank you to Bob in the chat room. Leave a comment. I'm going to go watch President Harris address the DNC. I'm going to try to do a show tomorrow. I kept it short. I'm capable of keeping it short. Take that, Jack Schlossberg, with your Mordechai Schlossberg charm.